let me talk about this in context, real context. This happens to be this was actually based upon an Oracle 11i deployment. I'm not going to tell you whose it was, but this was an Oracle 11i deployment. You guys know Oracle 11i, the ERP application? I know some of you do. What we did here, this happened to be a project where we were going through the life cycle of a very, very, very large Oracle 11i deployment. Multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. And one of the things that we found was that we actually got pulled into the scenario quite late on in the process. It's sort of ironic in a way. When you see all the figures, you think, well, you know, everybody would see the sense in this, bring in at the beginning, so we can find all these problems at the beginning when they aren't quite so serious. No, they wait until they're really in a hole, a very deep hole, and then they call you in at that point. But that's by the by. But what actually happened was it became very obvious to us that as we went through this process, the really bad stuff was happening right at the very beginning. You probably can't read it very well here, but the very first one in the definition phase says, potential failure. Project will be considered a failure. That's a pretty bad problem to have. Cause, high-level business objectives are not identified. Now you ask the question, would anybody go into one of these without understanding what their high-level business objectives were? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, they do. And they do it all the time. And we've actually seen situations where they've done it more than once. Never mind do it the first time. Metrics. High-risk total costs are identified. Post-deployment depression considered, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things that you can look at, but the point is that when you look at the things that go wrong, the really bad stuff's at the beginning. The second one is significantly extended time to return on investment. And the cause was, as is, to be blueprinting process gap was not sufficiently understood. Let me explain that a little bit more. When you put in a cuts application, the general consideration is that you're going to put it in as close to vanilla as you can because that's the way it was designed to work. That's where the are. But if you're going to do it that way, that means you're going to have to re-engineer a lot of your processes. It's just the nature of the beast. If you never go through that re-engineering, surprise, surprise, you get this whole symptom of trying to put a round peg into a square hole. And it doesn't work. At the end of it, you don't get your return on investment. Has anybody heard that one before? We got to the end of it and I didn't get my return I was expecting. A lot of it was caused right at the very beginning of the process. Again, doesn't get detected. So the big thing that we found out very early on was you have to detect the things early on. You have to look for the things early on. You have to know what to look for early on, and you have to know how to measure it. That's a very, very important component here, how to measure it. Because it isn't good enough just to say, guys, we don't know what our high-level business objectives are. You think it would resonate, it doesn't always. But if you say to them, guys, you don't know what it is you're trying to achieve here. So let me graph out how long it's going to try to get you to get to that goal of not knowing what you want to achieve. You can imagine the graph has an infinity in it somewhere. You will never get there. So, I know that's probably a bit of an extreme example, but frankly, we've seen situations where the objectives are very, very loose. And you could have 50 different paths to it. And so graphing out how long it's going to take to actually get there was quite eye-opening for some of the clients. So I guess the message here is that don't take anything for granted. Look for all the obvious stuff. Look for it in phase. Because if you don't grab it in phase, you'll see at the end there it says as much as times 100. We've seen a couple of situations here that a requirements problem, seemingly a not very significant requirements problem, in fact a requirements problem that was only down to being ambiguous, it wasn't even missing, it was just ambiguous, caused a problem 100 times the cost when it got delivered to the customer, because it happened to be a prime thing that the customer was looking for. So, you can't take anything for granted here. So a big part of the IV&V process here is finding the stuff, finding it early, fixing it early so that it doesn't proliferate all the way through the process. And it's not just technical stuff. These are business things. These are people things. Questions?